Well, thanks guys for coming down and agreeing to do an endorsement interview with us.
One of the last remaining newspapers in the world right here.
Don't say that.
Hey, that's not a great honor.
Yeah, no, I feel very privileged to get to work here every day. So why don't you just introduce yourselves for the camera and just state what you're running for and why you're running. And you can start with you, John.
My name is John Short. I'm running for CCC Board of Directors, Zone 5. I'm running for a number of reasons. First off is that I feel like Jim Clinton needed a bit of a run for his money, if you don't mind me saying that. But I want to improve the college in the following ways. I'd like to see childcare become an option for most students, especially those students that have children. I'd like to see campus security get further reformed and become less of a threat to the well-being of campus students. And I'd like to see the opportunities for students on the outside of what we normally consider as students to be able to access the college in more ways, such as through online degree programs and improved transit options for the area. So.
Great. Take it away, Jim.
So I'm Jim Clinton. I have lived here in Bend for 20-something years now, and was on the Bend City Council for 12 years and spent 4 years as mayor. The reason I'm interested in serving on the COCC board goes way back into my childhood, where I saw that people who had opportunities for higher education got their lives transformed in a very good way in virtually every case. I never heard of anybody go to college and then afterwards say, gosh, I wish I wouldn't have gone to college. They may wish they would have done it differently, like a lot less student debt and maybe majored in something else, but the concept of higher education being available to everybody has always been really important to me and crucial in my own life. So I want that to be an opportunity for everybody, regardless of their background, their age, or where they came from, geographically or ethnically or in any other way.
I apologize.
It has to be an opportunity for everybody. And here in Bend, in Central Oregon, we have COCC as kind of the primary provider of higher education. And so it's incumbent upon the college to make those opportunities available to everybody. And so that's basically the reason I'm running. So I already know exactly what's involved since I got appointed to the board just a few months ago. So I know what's involved in serving on the board at COCC. Mm-hmm. And my background with city government is useful in a bunch of different ways, so that I was able to kind of be up to speed very quickly. And one of the major tasks we had was to choose a new president, which we did, and I think we did a good job with it. Mm-hmm. And previously they didn't do such a good job with it, and in the sense that they kind of screwed up the recruitment and choosing somebody who subsequently had to be removed from the process. So it got kind of convoluted and mixed up. But anyway, this time it was very smooth, and it was smooth because it was very inclusive for the students, for the staff, for the faculty, for the administrators, for people in the community. We did a very thorough process, and I think we came up with a person who's going to advance the mission of the college and be totally in alignment with the policies of the board. So I felt it was important to be part of that process of selecting the new president, and also important to be part of getting her installed and introduced to the community and off on the right foot with a lot of the kind of issues, some of which John talked about, to be advanced for the good of the college and for the good of the students and the good of the community.
Something that we've kicked off all of our school board endorsement interviews with was just, tell us your impression of what you believe the role of the board is, and you touched on that a little bit, but we'll start with John.
So the role of the board that I see is to help help the college move forward and help the college develop, and also just to set policies and things that the college has to enforce. I think that the board also needs to be a part of the college community, and that it needs to take into account the experience of students, the experience of staff members, the experience of faculty, as well as taking care of things like the budget and hiring and firing and the president, and it needs to be, I think the board needs to be accountable to those that it's representing.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Do you believe the current board is being accountable to its students and staff?
Not as much as it could be. I talked with student government a few days ago, and I'm going to be talking with them again later today about the board race. And the impression I got from student government was that they didn't feel like the board represented them very well, and that they felt like they didn't have any say in the running of the college. Which, to be fair, they're student government. They're not the board, but I think it's important to have that, have there be strong linkages between student government and the board, because student government knows what's going on in the students' lives.
Okay.
So.
I'm going to repeat the question.
I think I remember.
Okay.
So I've been on a number of different boards besides being on the city council, and I would distinguish between an elected board and an appointed board. And in a sense, COCC is a little unusual as far as colleges go in that it has an elected board. So the primary allegiance of the board is to the people who vote.
Mm-hmm.
The voters are the ultimate. If you look at the organizational chart, you would put the voters at the top, then the board, and then the administration of the college. And the reason that makes a difference is because the board is not there to be a cheerleader for the administration, as it often is in, I would say, distinguish that between COCC and OSU Cascades, which has sort of a board of advisors. Often colleges have boards of trustees, and their role is kind of to be cheerleaders for, among other things, to be cheerleaders for the college. And I'd say that's a secondary role for an elected board, which is, like I say, responsible to the electorate ultimately. And so as far as personal philosophy is concerned, I would say that the criterion I use in making decisions at a college has to do with the students. What's best for the students?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a tendency on these kinds of boards to only hear from the administration and only hear from the faculty, and therefore to be kind of focused in that direction. But that is missing the primary function of the college, which is to be there for the students, to do what's best to enhance the student experience and the success of the students. And so I think the reason it's a little different, in fact it's a lot different from being on the city council. There's a huge amount of head-butting, as you know, at the city council. There's always an ideological divide, and I spent plenty of time, in what I would call ideological battles against anti-government types, people who are also on there, and I always try to keep in mind that I was there to serve the people, not to serve the government or some ideology. But at the college, it's a more collegial atmosphere, but you still have to be really careful to keep in mind what the mission is, which is to serve the students. And so when making decisions, you always need to do what's best for the students. And I guess another distinguishing characteristic of a college board like that is compared to, say, the school board. The school board sets policy, and that's great. And then the superintendent and the principals can say, all you teachers out there, we're used to do this, now we're going to do that. And you know, if there's a choice between A and B, we used to do A, now we're going to tell all you teachers to do B. And the teachers don't really have a strong say in that process. However, at a college, the faculty has a lot more power. And if they don't want to do B, when the administration says we need to do that, then they can say shove it. Of course, since they're highly educated people, they won't say it exactly that way. But believe me, they will work around in a way that undermines policies they don't agree with. And since they have a lot of power, they have the power to what they do in the classroom, they have the power to hire new faculty. They have a great deal of power. So in that kind of environment, you have to, as a board, be collaborative. You can't just pass policies then and expect everybody to just fall in line behind it. Mm-hmm. So the collaboration part I would emphasize, and that was the criterion we focused on when choosing a new president. You have to work together to get stuff done. As far as listening to students, absolutely. Like I say, that's task one, is to do what's best for the students. I have noticed in the number of board meetings I've been to so far, very, very few students show up there to the board meetings. And the public is invited, very few members of the public show up. That is too bad. That is unfortunate, and so I think the board needs to do a better job of reaching out and encouraging students and people from the community to get involved in the campus, helping with these policy questions. And because if you don't hear from those segments, then the board will only make decisions based on the people they do hear from. Mm-hmm. So that's an area where the board could do better. It's been a little disrupted because, as you know, there was a guy on the board who resigned, and then they had this presidential thing, so they've been a bit distracted on these other issues. So, but anyway, that's going to be one of my initiatives if I get elected, is to make sure that the board does a better job of hearing from other groups.
I guess since you both brought it up, and I'll start with John again. I mean, you sort of shared your perspective, but when you talked to student government, did they mention whether they felt going to the COCC board meetings was a priority?
I didn't ask them about that. One thing I would say would be that I think it would be important for a board member or two to attend the student government meetings as well.
Right, it goes both ways, yeah. Would that be something that you would find valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, since we're talking about board, I've continuously been irritated by a lot of people's approach to serving on boards, the so-called Carver model you may have heard about, that a lot of people are really pay attention to. And in the Carver model is really like, if you have a corporate board, you just tell the CEO what the goal is, and then you step back and don't get involved. And the CEO then is supposed to carry out the board policies. And I think that's I've had this discussion with lots of people who serve on boards. I think it's a really crappy model for something like a COCC board or a school board or a city council, because the way people get stuff done is they work together. Mm-hmm. And you have to collaborate with people who are, actually carrying out the mission you make the policy, but you can't then just sit back and hope that they're gonna do it. You have to work with people to get things done, and that's true, like I say, at the city and definitely true at the COCC board level. You can't just Carver models sit in the background after you push out the policy and just expect everyone's automatically going to be on board with it. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I'm curious about, along those lines, you know, there's other members, other board candidates, and this is more along the lines of the school board, have said, yeah, you know, we're going to establish a policy, but we're not going to actually come up with any teeth to it, to how you're going to execute that. So, you know, do you think that when you come up with a policy, there should be the follow-through steps involved in that? You know, should you as a board member be involved with the follow-through steps of executing that policy?
My answer to that would be absolutely yes. If it's just too naive, especially, you know, I've been around the block here quite a bit on boards, the ones that are most effective where they have a real collaborative process. And sometimes that's misinterpreted as micromanaging, where the board member, like at the city, would go down there to the planning department and get in the middle of, you know, particular projects and say, no, you can't do it this way, you gotta do it that way. That's micromanaging, totally inappropriate. But when, more to the point of your question, when the board makes a policy, then it needs to work with the people who are implementing it. People just don't automatically, you know, we all have our biases and our experiences and stuff, and it's only through collaboration that we actually accomplish stuff in this kind of civic arena. And so absolutely follow-up is critical.
Do you have specific steps that you would take, or, you know, ideas around that?
For me, a lot of my experience in the workplace has been with nonprofits, both at community college level and at the just more small nonprofit sort of thing. And I've experienced both micromanagement and the hands-off board, and I don't like either of them. But I think what needs to happen is that the board needs to get together with the stakeholders when we're implementing or when we're thinking of the policy, even before we start implementing it, to get an understanding of what things are on the ground. And then the board needs to come back to that policy after it's been set and see, okay, we've set this policy, what are the things that are, what sort of resistance are we getting? What sort of problems are we seeing with it? How do we need to change it to react to the problems that are on the ground? Because too often, and my wife who works at Fred Meyer sees this all the time, too often you have a distant, unresponsive leadership that just sends down edicts from above that don't make any sense on the ground. And so that's something that I want to make sure that we're constantly got a transfer of information from the board to the people that are implementing the policy and from the people who are implementing the policy to the board, so that we know exactly what the effects of what we're doing are.
So you mentioned you having worked with nonprofits and community college. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Sorry, I should have done that at the beginning, but I was a associate professor of agriculture and the farm manager for College of the Redwoods in Eureka, California. And then I worked for a couple of nonprofits, Sustainable Conservation in California, and New Entry, let's see, it's a long name, New Entry Sustainable Farming Project in New England. And so in those places I've been either a researcher or I was actually running their New Entry's farm education program.
Okay.
So.
Chris, do you have something you want to jump in with?
I am curious, and maybe this isn't part of the board, but I'm wondering if it is. So I did some research on OSU Cascades and their net zero energy program that they're trying to get in, and I know that COCC has done some stuff. I'm curious where you guys, see the board moving toward that type of goal, or where are you at with net zero energy, and how do we implement that?
Or if it's a priority in your
Yeah.
Well, for me, in the past, I've worked in solar energy applications myself. And when I was in San Diego, I wrote a book about solar energy that was then used in a whole bunch of extension classes I taught for the community. And I went to Mesa College, community college there, and set up a new program on training solar energy technicians, which I then also taught. So I have a lot of practical experience in alternative energies. Also, just as an anecdote, I've had a postdoc at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where Keeling was measuring the CO2 in the atmosphere. And a friend of mine was in charge of calibrating the instruments they put up on Mauna Kea that have started making this concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so even in those days, I was highly motivated to see the world do something about its CO2 generation and burning of fossil fuels. It didn't take rocket scientists, as we say, to notice that the humanity was blowing off fossil fuels that took the Earth hundreds and hundreds of millions of years to deposit, and blowing it off within just a small number of human generations, a few hundred years. So I recognized it as a problem and did something about it even then. So that's a long introduction to the point, which is one of the things I will be doing on the board if I continue is getting COCC to pay a lot more attention to alternative transportation, alternative energy generation, conservation things generally. And there's kind of two motivations. One is just as a citizen of the institutional citizen of the world, it's a responsibility to cut down fossil fuel use. But also, since this is an educational place, it needs to take a lead and demonstrate to the rest of the community. We have, like, for example, certain newspapers in Bend who, like the Bulletin, that is always riling away, we don't need a plastic bag ban because, it doesn't make any big difference in the world, just what we do here in little old Bend. Likewise with fossil fuels. Well, that's just bullshit, If everybody thought that way, then, we're going to go to hell even sooner than we're going to go to hell anyway, because it doesn't look like humanity is capable of getting a grip on this. But the next generation maybe is smarter than the previous generations and will be able to do something about it. So that starts at the schools, it starts at the colleges, and then if everyone works hard enough, then everybody else will see the light also. So absolutely, COCC must take one of the leads in this community for doing that. Mm-hmm. One of the challenges of COCC, if you look at a map of where people who attend COCC live, it's like somebody hit the map of Central Oregon with a shotgun. They're everywhere. And how do they get there? Well, they get there by their private car primarily. Mm-hmm. And so these things are all interconnected, like more housing on the campus, more help with people with public transit, and more involvement on the other campuses so people don't have to go so far, and more online classes so people can, not have to attend the campus so many times during the week. So all of those little things are things that the board needs to take a look at and make some progress on sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
I would say a couple of important things as far as that goes is I think that it's important that the college does what it can to combat climate change and such. I'm not sure that building a huge solar plant on the college is going to necessarily fix that. One option I think is going to and maybe the college already does this, I don't know, but it would be doing the blue sky energy through Pacific Power, where not only are we doing our own, making our own energy areas more efficient, but we're also only buying energy from renewable sources, things like that. The other thing I would say is that, as Jim said, we need to make public transit a better option for students, but that's not going to be an option for every student, because there isn't really reason to send a bus out to Brothers. There's just not the we'd be spending more carbon emissions than we would if we didn't, basically. But things like having more classes at satellite campuses, things like having an online degree program so that you don't have to come to campus except for graduation or counseling would be much better. I also think we need a campus opened up in La Pine for serving the southern half of our district that currently doesn't have a campus down there. We have campuses in Madras and Prineville and Redmond, but we don't have one south of Bend.
You brought up the transit thing early on. Have you thought about specific steps for that?
So, a couple. The easiest step is building a bike parking lot down below the hill so that students from Bend can bike to campus without having to bike all the way up the hill, and then running a shuttle from that parking lot to the main campus.
When you say the hill, like what specifically?
So,
which part?
You've got College Way, that big going up, and then you've also got, I've biked it several times, you've also got the Newport Avenue after College Way splits off. You can go around the other way, and it's not as steep, but it's still a rough bike ride, especially if riding your bike is not something you do for pleasure. What I would like to see better options for non-car transport. Another thing would be working with COIC to get better bus links between campuses, so that if you need to go to 2 campuses in a day, like you have a class in Redmond because that's convenient, but then you also have to do a class in Bend because you have to get it done for your degree, that you can actually get a ride from campus to campus. And maybe that's not something that CIC needs to do, maybe that's something the college needs to do, but I think that interconnectedness of campuses is going to be really important.
So we were trying to unpack the enrollment numbers for the last 5 years. I know this has been definitely a topic of conversation, and it looks like there's been quite a drop in enrollment. So I just thought, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and if that's a problem and what the solutions might be. And I'll let Jim start this time.
Enrollment is a problem for a number of reasons, one of which is less money, fewer students getting educated, and there's also a morale issue because when a college has declining enrollment and the fact that classes start shrinking and some have to be eliminated, and some courses that people are enthused about getting up and running maybe are put off. And so there's a lot of reasons you don't like declining enrollment. Of course, community colleges have this cyclical behavior with enrollment to the business cycle. And when there's a lot of employment in the bin in Central Oregon, then people are working. When the economy crashes, as it's done more than once in the past, people go back to school. And so this is still, I think the enrollment is somewhat stabilized, but it's definitely less than it was before. I would point out that it's like 5,000 FTE students at COCC and maybe 12, 15,000, whatever, depending on how you count as a head count. That's still way, way bigger than OSU Cascades in terms of number of people impacted. And I think one of the morale issues maybe is that the community has paid a great deal of attention to OSU Cascades, and a lot of the attention paid to COCC has been negative, especially the horrific tragedy that occurred. And so I think kind of rebuilding morale and supporting the faculty, supporting the students are important tasks. As far as actual enrollment is concerned, there's a bit of a disconnect, not only here at COCC, but around the country, with what kind of career and technical education courses are available and what employers actually need. And so I think COCC needs to do a better job of collaborating with the businesses that are here to tailor their programs so that they will attract students, and then when the students complete these programs, they actually have jobs waiting for them. And there's a number of companies that are in the middle of sort of the tech industry, and they often, and that's true also of the medical industry, somewhat surprisingly, like St. Charles, when they go to hire a new technician, and they're always expanding. It's like the medical industry is always in a bull market, no matter what the rest of the economy is doing. When they go to hire technicians and nurses and so on, they often hire them from other communities. And of course, we can all have our opinions about growth generally, and that was obviously a big philosophical topic at the city, but it doesn't help the housing situation and the lack of affordability of housing when you're hiring all the employees from some other place. And then the people here don't have jobs, so even if they had a job, it would be tough to find good housing here, but without a job, you are toast. So you absolutely have to do a better job of matching the educational stuff, and then the enrollment will thereby increase if you are offering programs that are appealing to a larger number of students. It's an interesting strategic problem for the college because it's very expensive to set up these programs. I may not have so many students, and if you can get introductory biology and get 50, 100, whatever students in there, it's a lot more cost effective to do that. And so they, just like any other institution, they tend to, stay with what they have done and be careful about setting up these new programs. But nevertheless, you got to try hard. A couple little points there. One is the incentives are not very well lined up for the faculty to set up new programs that actually might attract a lot of students. They might have to write proposals and get grants, kind of on their own time. And like an online class, which could be useful in a lot of areas, get the enrollment up and provide more opportunities for students. That takes a hell of a lot of work to set up an online class. And if the faculty is only getting paid by how many hours they're spending in the classroom, then you got a mismatch there. So these are all areas where the board has a role, for sure.
So the original question was about enrollment.
Yep. So I agree with Jim there in that enrollment's tricky, especially when the economy is doing great, because people feel like they don't need that higher education. At the same time, we're a very large community college that needs students to survive. So I think several of the things that I would suggest doing for improving enrollment is one, going to the big employers in town and asking them, what skills do you need in workers? Asking them also, what ways are they willing to contribute to that? Because it shouldn't just be public funds going into training private workers. But also, we need to increase the really increase the ability for students to go to college through things like childcare, through things like better transportation options, and through online degree programs. At the moment, CSUC does not have an online degree program, and so I think that's something that it needs, especially in such a large district.
Would you agree with that, Jim? Are you in favor of advocating for online degrees?
Yes. You have to be careful because, like at Stanford, when all of this technology became first available, they would set up a lecture series on whatever, and they would get 150,000 people signed up for it all around the world. And the experience was varied, but to the first approximation, not so many people actually completed it, and not so many people, actually got anything towards a degree out of that type of arrangement. And so the best kind of programs that I've seen are the ones that are hybrids, where you do a lot of stuff online, but then you show up on the campus like maybe once a week or even less often, depending on the type of material. And so you have some real human interaction. And the human interaction, I come from an era where it was pretty much exclusively the guy standing in front of the professor standing in front of the group of 30 students and thinking by magic that everything they had to say was going to be absorbed by all those students. And so people have actually, there's an interesting guy who was a professor of astronomy at Columbia. He did an experiment where he took all his students and gave them a test, and then he waited a year, and then he went out onto the campus and gave them the same test of people that picked at random, and his former students from the previous year. They basically did the same on astronomy. So the retention and that kind of traditional thing that we've always done, and we've always assumed, since like the 12th century, that that's the way we do higher education. This kind of lecture model is pretty ineffective in actually getting retention. And so properly designed online courses, especially with some human element so people don't feel isolated, they can go in there and talk to a real person and solve their particular issues. One of the things you notice is that everybody learns in a different way. And we have this kind of myth that, here's some people who are smart and here's some people who are dumb. And, well, it turns out, like half the people we consider dumb or really have dyslexia. They have trouble reading.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the people just think in a different way. And some of the smartest people in the kind of field I work in, which is, pretty advanced kind of physics, technical stuff, are people who just don't think in the traditional way. They're the ones who are the most creative. They're the ones you really want to have, and also they may have come from some different background from the usual one. So altogether, you just have to, as a campus, you have to try different things and see which ones work better. And there of course, there's a lot of literature out there at this point about what works and what doesn't, but, you know, it's a long-winded answer to the online question, which is the best ones, I think, are hybrids. So you have to incentivize the faculty to match their compensation with the fact that getting these things up and running is really time intensive. But once you do get them up, it's kind of much easier the second and third and fourth year you do it. So
Has the current board been in discussion about more online offerings?
yeah, everyone sort of pays it some lip service and encourages it, but as far as actual progress, it has been fairly limited. Also, although the faculty has done, I think, in the last year, has done a good job of getting a bunch of new online classes up and running. And one of the advantages there is you have the opportunity for very immediate feedback.
Yeah, so your distinction is that you want to have a class, a degree program that's completely off-site.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like that's important for students that really do have a hard time making it to Bend on a regular basis. Or for students that have children that they have to find someone to take care of them. I'm especially thinking of single mothers, single parents that, they're already paying so much in child care and they have to work. It's like getting to a different place without children is going to be difficult, like even more so.
So this time goes very quickly. We're rounding up to the end. I want to give you guys an opportunity to bring up anything that we haven't talked about yet, but you did bring up campus safety, and of course this has been in the news and all this stuff. I know that you believe that COCC can be doing more. There has been a lot of movement in that direction. I know, they've changed a lot of things, and now the legislature has stepped in to help out with that. So I'm curious on your end, what additional steps you think COCC should need to be taking?
I feel like the important thing that needs to happen is that we need to have a close relationship, the board needs to have a close relationship with campus security to make sure that campus security isn't just doing the letter of the law, but they're also following the spirit of the law. And that involves doing things like riding along, that involves making sure that campus security feels like they're a valued part of campus, as well as being a civilian security, I hesitate to use the word force, but so that they become more of an integrated part of campus as opposed to something that makes other students nervous, that makes other students fear for their well-being.
Okay, so stronger relationships is the additional thing.
I feel like stronger relationships and in doing things like restorative justice style programs are very important, where campus security is also a participant in those things, as opposed to just being the ticket writers.
Okay.
Oh yeah, campus security is a long-standing issue all around the world, and to imagine, I mean, after all, the colleges are places of free and open inquiry where you don't want to have any heavy police presence, even though, in some cases that might increase security. You still got to be really careful with how you do this. And COCC had this, unbelievable tragedy happen there, and then there was a very kind of emotional reaction to it. And we totally understand why it was such an emotional thing. But in the then part of what happened was what I used to see and drive me nuts at the city, was that once there's a lawsuit filed, then the attorneys tell the people on the board and everybody to not say anything. And that's a really, I've fought against that for a long time, where, just because somebody files a lawsuit doesn't mean it's time for the elected boards to keep their mouth shut. You gotta be careful, what you say, but it makes it look like the only side of the story that is getting told is the one side that feels free to talk about it. And so COCC was very silent for a really long time. And finally now in the last few months really it's told its side of the story, which is that every one of the requested actions by Chief of Police Porter and DA Hummel have been carried out. They got rid of the bumpers, they got rid of the cage in the vehicles, they got rid of the lights. They did all this stuff that was asked, and even they started doing this stuff real early. So, one could argue about what they've dragged their feet on some of the issues, but anyway, at this point, the relationship between the sworn law enforcement officers and the campus is greatly improved. And what we did at the last board meeting was approve the appointment of a community or a campus resource officer, sort of like they do in the high schools, where Bend police officers assigned to the campus. The city pays half, the college pays half, and so they don't have to speculate anymore. By they, I mean the security people at COCC don't have to speculate on whether the cop's going to like this or not, because they got a cop right there working with them. So that's going to be a huge improvement.
When will that be hired for?
I think sometime this summer was my understanding.
Okay.
Get it up and running pretty quickly. And so I guess I'm totally on board with the Cayley's law, the intent of it, and the wording of it. That's all fine. COCC's already done all that stuff. I would just urge a little caution that there is no panacea to campus security. We see just in the last few days yet another shooting at the campus. University of North Carolina, I think it's Charlotte. Lunatics have the upper hand if they want to do bad stuff. And the particular tragedy at COCC was the lunatic was actually a security guard there. It kind of reminded me of a case when I lived in San Diego where a highway patrol officer murdered like 12 different women. He would stop them and ultimately kill them. It took a really long time to catch him because you figured, God, this guy, even in California Highway Patrol. So, people are complex beings and some of them just go totally off the rails. It's not very well understood. If you look at what this Laura guy did, he's crazy. And should they have recognized some of these signs? Probably should have, yeah. But see, not only was he a security guard there, he was a student there. That's unbelievable that something like that could happen, but that kind of shit does happen. And so I think COCC was greatly impacted by this whole thing, and they still haven't gotten over it, but they're trying to take the right steps. And I think if the students must feel very comfortable, so I agree with some of John's ideas of something that should be done to help the students feel more safe and actually be more safe. You have to be able to trust those guys. And my nephew's a cop in Portland, and I know by talking to him at length that cops always have an issue with private security people. It's a cultural thing and it's a practical thing. You don't want people out there acting like cops. However, if you take away their tools, then in that sense the campus may be less safe. So you got to be really careful about how you do this kind of stuff. But like I say, all the ideas I've heard, I'm totally on board with, and I think improvements must continue to be made. If you can't feel safe on a college campus, I don't know where you can feel safe. So it's a high priority.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that.
Well, we are at the end of our time. So obviously we didn't get to touch on nearly as many things as we could. So I'd be happy to hear anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like to discuss, and also, just share with us why you think you are the best candidate for voters to support in the election. And let's just try to keep each of the responses hopefully to a minute or two. So, any volunteers to go first?
I guess I would just say that my experience and commitment to the students make me the good person to continue on the board. I have the interest in doing it, and I have the experience, and I know what's involved so that I can actually make a difference. One of the experiences on the city council is you don't get anything done unless you have 4 votes. That carries over to the board there, and so you have to get the other board members on the wavelength if you want to do something. So I think, I'm able to do that. Kind of a low-key, kind of non-confrontational, kind of non-head-butting way. My opponent, John, is a nice person. No question about that, and I think his heart's totally in the right place. And the only one thing that I would take issue with is he, in another venue, suggested that a vote for me was a vote for the status quo, and I don't think that's fair representation, because number one, I've only been on the board for a few months, so I can't really represent the status quo. And number two, anybody who knows my record on the city council and as mayor know that I'm not a status quo kind of guy. I was voting no more than anybody during much of my tenure on the city council, because I'm always questioning the staff, always questioning the existing policies, and trying to see if we can change something to make it work better for the citizens here.
Thanks.
I would say that I'm the best choice due to my experience as a student at CUCC. I was a student there for a year and a half. My experience as a faculty member at a community college, and my experience working as a staff and administrative member at a community college, I feel like I've filled all the other shoes, and I'd like to bring that experience to the board, where I can come from. I can understand where people are coming from on all those topics. My statement that vote for the status quo was not an intention to denigrate you. It was merely that the board selected you, and that many boards select people that they feel like they already agree with where they're going. And so I just wanted to say that now that I've met you, I don't think that that's actually the case, but
Thank you.
I appreciate the kickback a bit. So,
Yeah,
pushback.
like I said, this isn't a true debate, but you do get a chance to, say something to one another.
This is a short campaign season. We don't have any forums. Well, there was one the other night
Yeah,
by the diversity groups,
yeah,
which was actually good.
Mhm.
definitely.
But we don't get too many chances. City council seems like they went on and on and on.
No, that's right. Well, thanks you guys for coming, and thanks for, throwing your hat in the ring. We always appreciate people, contributing to our democracy. And best of luck in the campaign.
Thank you.